Elyssa, thank you so much for making time to come on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, my name is Elyssa Campo. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Ceres. And Ceres is a nonprofit advocacy organization that works to accelerate the transition to a cleaner, more just, and resilient economy. And so the work that I do there
Hmm.
lies at the intersection of like environmental justice, but and inclusion and well-being and culture building for staff. So my primary focus is on like the internal DEI work. So building out our culture, creating a more inclusive environment for all folks, regardless of identity or lived experience. And I come to this work with a background in recruitment and talent acquisition, and also as my side hustle, if you will, is a career happiness coach. So I have some experience doing coaching as well. While the focus there is on centering joy and finding joy and purpose in your work.
I love it. It's a really noble work as your primary, and I'm fascinated by just the title alone of your side hustle, your side gig. On that note, right, things are changing in the environment. Needs at work are changing. Like, what gets in the way of people's
Yeah.
happiness at work,
Oh my gosh. I don't know if we have enough time for all of the things right now. But no, in all seriousness, I think, especially in today's environment, as far as the work that I do or the experience that I have with my colleagues who work in the environmental space,
Mhm.
there's just a lot of external concern that folks have right now with the EOs coming out of our current administration, just general political discourse on climate change, climate issues. So there's like this existential challenge that folks are experiencing, right? But then I think there's also, as part of that, there's also just this general feeling of overwhelm with everything that's kind of going on in the world, compounding. If folks pay attention to the news, then there's just a lot out there. And so showing up at work, depending on your organizational culture, feeling like you can show up authentically as a human with all of those things swirling around. It can
Yeah.
affect how you show up if you feel like you're able to show up as, maybe not at full capacity versus feeling like you have to put on this front when you walk into the office, so to speak. I think there's just a lot of yeah, there's just a lot of stuff happening. Like everything just feels a lot more um there's like an urgency or like things are just I
And
don't
a
know.
heaviness to it all.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, the outdated kind of leave everything at the door for work. We've had an era where people started to realize that, that's hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in the last 10 years, the external pressure has just gotten so much bigger,
Mhm.
and it's harder to leave that at the door. So when you talk about happiness or fulfillment at work, when you work with people, do you find that they know what they need, or is there some other things at play or some other education that do like you have to help people to understand what they need to be happy or to feel safe at work to, do what they need to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it certainly depends, where you are at in your journey. If you're feeling really burnt out, then you may have kind of started to take the time to assess like, okay, this
Mhm.
isn't working. What do I need? But then, I think there are also folks who are just like, something's off, something's not right. What is it? I need to find whether it's like the idea of work-life balance, but what does that actually mean for you,
It doesn't
right?
have to mean
And
for
and
anybody,
I
any of us.
also
Yeah.
and I'm also personally not a huge fan of the concept of work-life balance. I've always thought of it more as work-life integration because it's
Still tough.
impossible
It's
to,
still tough,
to
but yeah.
separate. those things, right? Because work-life balance insinuates this idea that like there is a separation. And while that's true, it's impossible as a human being to show up to work, if you're dealing with all of like things going on in your family, you just walk in the door and we don't live in a world where the severance is real. Like you can't just walk in the door.
Oh, like the show Severance,
Yeah,
where you
right. Right.
I
Like
am a huge fan. That show just captivated me. Yes.
it really was. So yeah, a lot of the work that I do with folks who are unsure, and a lot of coaching in general is around overcoming limiting beliefs. What are the stories that we've told ourselves that are keeping us in a certain mindset or in a certain perspective, and trying and just taking the time to really reflect and think about what is it from a career perspective, a career happiness perspective, what is it that we want to what does our ideal role look like, or what does happiness at work feel like? Have we experienced that? Describing what that is, and if you haven't, thinking back to when you were younger, or when you were planning your career, what were the things that really stood out to you that you were hoping to experience in your work, and finding the path back to that if that's not the current trajectory that you're on.
I love the coaching background. I too am a coach, and that's where I've seen the most growth in the leaders that I've worked with, especially for their personal well-being, but then their inclusive leadership style.
Mhm.
One of the things I noticed, and I want to see if you've seen this as well, is that there's a good deal of emotional labor involved in trying to shift from that unhappy state or that unengaged state to then move into and do an exercise like trying to recall a happy moment or realize that you are empowered to move your thoughts and your feelings in a certain direction. Do you find that talking about feelings at work in this context is like easily done or welcomed, or is it a challenge?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it can be a challenge. I think I'm fortunate enough to be in a role where it's not out of the norm for me to come at this work from a place of emotions or feelings, because diversity, equity, and inclusion is inherently like human and tied to how we show up as people first and foremost, and we are all emotional beings. So I think, and also with the resurgence of like emotional intelligence and its importance in leadership, I think I personally haven't found it to be really hard to engage in those conversations or to start those conversations. I think depending on the leadership, or the individuals, that's when it can be a little challenging. Especially, I've noticed too, as it relate, there's some generational differences as well. So leaders who are in like the, you know, I would say Gen X, Millennial, and any Gen Z that have worked up into a leadership role tend to be a little bit more forthcoming and open with
Mhm.
emotion. But I find that some of our boomer colleagues, it's not their first perspective or first thought when they're coming into conversations about leadership. There's a need to like remind folks or bring that up as like why it's important and why it's valued. So yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's fair to just acknowledge that it was a different time.
oh,
Management in
100%.
work was um, command and control, and
Yep.
now we're trying to really bring in that holistic approach. And for some folks, especially older folks, it's the first time that this is, required at work or even talked about at work. So um, I too see some of that struggle. And I'd even say, and I sit solidly within Gen X, even younger generations, they require, and I'm so excited because it's like it's a no BS, like we want inclusion, we want these things
Yep.
in place, let's do what makes sense. But then like the emotion piece is like almost like feels like it's skewed the other way. Like emotions are
Mhm.
so much more important and have to be affirmed and attended to. And there maybe is a different resilience looks different than it does for somebody who has, lived a full life of those challenging experiences.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, I think it's like it's like a pendulum. It can be a pendulum. Like it's starts to swing in in the other direction. And I think, in this term, in this perspective, I think balance, finding that balance with, having those conversations while also recognizing this is a workplace. There are expectations in terms of, delivery and productivity. And so finding that and bringing both of those differing perspectives into a conversation where they can, both have add value and have a real dialogue versus one being caught up in like in one perspective or the other as far as like emotion versus that command control perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the work output
Mhm.
and creating space for innovation and the bottom line, so to speak, it's always been front and center in this work, if even if it's been the main motivator, because we know that when people are engaged, when they're happy and when they feel like they belong, they tend to produce more, they innovate more.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, do you run up against that concept or that challenge that people think that this work on engagement, inclusion, feelings at work is at odds with the bottom line?
I personally in my work and in my role, not so much. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's at odds with the bottom line, but I think in terms of like prioritization of
Mhm.
when we have these conversations or when it makes sense to have these conversations can be skewed based off of this, I don't have time to think about DEI because I need to meet my deliverables. And it's like it's not an add-on, right? It's something, it's a perspective, it's a way to view a lens through which to think about things. And so what I've found helpful in those situations is to and I know that this has become like a hot button topic, but psychological safety,
Mhm.
I've found that that tends to land well with folks because of this idea that, again, saying everything that you were saying before, if we're creating environments where folks feel like they're psychologically safe enough to, have a different perspective or share how they're actually feeling about something, and be heard and recognized in that, and supported, however that looks, then it does lead to improved innovation, improved, feedback loops, and folks are more willing to, yeah, to deliver their best if they feel wholly and fully supported as an individual. So yeah.
Creating psychological safety is at the heart of the coaching and the work that I try to do with companies because of exactly what you said. And there's a growing, uh, like, what do you call that? A growing amount of data to support
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
function. The key is like it's you got to know how to do it. What your brain needs to feel safe is different than your colleagues, and how do you bridge that gap? And I think that's really a rich environment for people connecting, getting a little vulnerable, learning skills, figuring
Mhm.
out what to do when you don't get what you want or your idea isn't accepted. It's not the end of the world, but it may have helped, innovate in some other way.
Yep.
I want to take us back a little bit to the happiness aspects. And as a coach, is it happiness coach or workplace happiness?
Career happiness.
Career happiness coach. All right. Sometimes the work that's in the same lane that you're doing, I think gets misaligned with all positivity all the time, and sometimes we hear even toxic positivity. How would you respond to someone who maybe gives an eye roll to this type of work, thinking along those lines, like, oh, toxic positivity, it's everything's great all the time?
Yeah, no, I would respond. So there's been a lot of or I've been looking into or doing research or just really embracing this idea of joy as an act of resistance. And so I've found that, I hear it, toxic positivity. As a naturally like optimistic person,
Mhm.
I understand that perspective, but I think I opt for this idea that it's not about happiness at the above all else, but it's really around like you deserve happiness. Like we're taught in our, historically, or like the way that the world, or I shouldn't say the world, the way that our society has viewed work has always
Mhm.
been like this thing that you just have to do to exist, or to which I personally have like so many feelings about. Like,
I get it.
we're the only species that has to pay to live on this
Exist.
planet,
Yeah.
yeah, to exist on this planet. But anywho, but with that in mind, I'm like, if we're going to be here and we spend so much of our time at work, why can't there be some element of joy? Why can't we find joy in that?
Mhm.
And it's not like that doing that is going to, that shouldn't be at the cost of, I like to use the example, and my mentor, the person that taught me about career happiness,
Mhm.
would always use the example, like, if your life dream is to become a pop star and you're working in accounting, like that's one thing, right? Like the idea around career happiness is there being more, based in reality, figuring out the ways. Like if you can't do the thing that you are super hyper passionate about in your day job, perhaps there are other avenues within your life where you can explore those things that bring you joy, and finding a way to allow work, or to shift so that work isn't like the only thing that you're thinking about or focusing on, but being able to again find that integration where it's a piece of your life, but it's not your sole identifier, and it's not the only thing in that motivates you, or like your sole purpose. Finding a way to balance your purpose and your passion.
So you help people align that purpose or find that purpose and passion and take steps to, if possible, align their
Mhm.
career to that. It reminds
Exactly.
me of a quote. I hope I get it right. And I think it was from Chris Rock, as part of a stand-up routine, talking about his kids, and hearing people say, "Oh, you can be anything you want. You could do anything." And he might have used an expletive to just kind of say, "That's not true. Like you can do anything you want if they're hiring."
Yeah.
And it has stuck with me because there is a balance, right? Not everybody is going to be a famous pop star, but there might be
Mm.
elements of that you can, really fuel your inner needs that will carry you through a boring workday in an accounting office, or however it may play out. I think around the topic of that positivity, I love the intentional direction that you bring to it, and being a naturally optimistic person. I would say that I am the opposite, naturally pessimistic. But what I've learned about through being a coach and through working with folks is that feeling what's real is
Mhm.
important, and feeling through it, because like emotions change and they're not always there, rather than ignoring them and just trying to like say everything's positive. That doesn't necessarily work. It may work temporarily, but to
Mhm.
really understand your feelings and what messages they bring, and then realize that you have some control in steering that ship a little bit.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. A big piece of what I help folks with is like, to go back to what you were saying earlier, like there is an emotional, um, not toll, but an emotional responsibility, right? Or
Mhm.
time necessary, to feeling. And so a lot of that is like giving folks the permission when sometimes they feel like they need it, to take those moments and reflect and prioritize reflection, and whatever the prompt may be. But I find that, yeah, exactly to your point. Like I'm not out here being like it's career happiness or bust, or like it's like they're the only, oh, you're feeling bad, that's fine. Just, take that frown and turn it upside down. Here's a silver lining. It's recognizing that, yeah, things might be tough, but you don't have to stay there. You can find a way, to shift your mindset, to shift your perspective, and just providing folks with the tools to do that.
And there's a lot of science and validation around this too, and you see it in these popular books and methods like grit and growth mindsets. It's like there's these elements in there, and they all require some level of emotional skills that
Mhm.
that come with it, and handling disappointment or handling not being good at something while you're trying to get good at it. Uh,
Mhm.
it's great work. Great work. So you mentioned all the things that are disruptive and challenge us to our happiness and our like full engagement at work. Um, Looking forward to the future, right? And let's leave current state aside. There's a lot of things changing. What do you think an organization can do to like plan for the future or future-proof themselves to give everyone the best opportunity to feel engaged and happy at work?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me around that is just prioritizing flexibility, recognizing that everyone is coming from very different places, very different experiences. So prioritizing that as much as possible, whether that's in your your policies, if it's remote versus hybrid versus coming full time in the office, and or just how you support your people. And I would say that's the other piece of it is recognizing folks as humans, and operating from that human first mentality, to the earlier points that we talked about, like especially as we think about technology and AI and all of these things and the things that are coming in that could potentially take away, or reinforce the need for that human element. I think prioritizing, or focusing on folks as humans and treating them as such, with flexibility in mind, and really creating opportunities for feedback, having established a feedback loop, so it's not this command and direct leadership response, but it's really a conversation, and you're able to be agile and respond to the needs of folks, as they will likely change, going forward in the future, as we do think about, I'm sure there will be a lot of wonderful things that happen in the future, but then there's being in the climate space, I can't help but think about the impending what's going to happen there, and we're already seeing it, with natural disasters and 100-year storms happening every year, multiple times in a year. So
It's why we had to cancel our first
yeah.
meeting because of a storm like we've never had here in Pittsburgh hitting,
Yeah,
knocking out
so
power. It's very real.
it's very real. So thinking about that, and just recognizing that people are going to be dealing with a lot more than maybe what they have historically.
Mm.
And we may not know the all of the full scope of it, but if you're creating an environment where folks are able to show up with those things or feeling some type of way, and are not feeling like they have to put on a facade, but could show up authentically as themselves, that would be my recommendation. I like to always, I like to say, we don't live in a Lego world. Not to throw out another movie reference, but like you don't have to come in and be like, everything's awesome, my life's great, like everything's fine. No, we
Great,
know.
that song is going to be stuck in my head
I
now.
know, sorry. uh,
Um, any tips to managers who may notice that someone that they're close to at work
mhm.
is unhappy or upset? Any tips or tricks you might give them on how to hold space and help someone through a tough moment?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I recommend leadership does, or people leaders, in particular, is having, when you're going into your regular one-on-ones or even like a team meeting, is starting off that conversation with just a quick check-in, like, and it doesn't have to be a full blown icebreaker, but just, in one or two words, how are you feeling, or what mindset are you bringing into today's conversation? And just doing that on a more regular, consistent basis. So it starts to develop this norm of people being able to say, "Oh yeah, I'm tired. I was up all night with my kids, so I'm showing up at 75%, but hey, I'm here.
But I'm
And
here.
realizing that, right? So just creating space for folks to show up, to share their truth or how they're feeling, and then modeling that yourself as a leader. Maybe you go first, right? And to kind of break the ice there. But modeling that yourself, I think, is equally as important as creating the space for it.
Yeah, and normalizing it, like
Mhm.
taking that stigma out of it and just acknowledge that everybody has a bad day, it's like you
Yep.
work with what you got. I think that is a great approach, and I really, really want to thank you for making time to share your insights with me today. I know we could fill a lot more time, but we've got to come to an end here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. It's been wonderful.